Hello everyone, today you join me on quite a rare day here for the British summer, i.e. the sun is actually shining, so it's a lovely day. Today what we're going to be working on today, or what I'm going to be working on today and talking to you about, is basically this hip, but it's not a normal hip, this is a bastard hip. Now the bastard hip for me is fairly simple. I did a video I think maybe 18 months, 2 years ago, and I got a lot of questions from a lot of people sort of asking me to sort of explain further, you know, how I go about marking out my bastard hips. And if you've watched that video, it was I got called in basically to try and put a job straight that had gone wrong, so I didn't really have chance to video it. But anyway, what I'm going to do here is show you how I go about setting out a bastard hip, and hopefully sort of demystify it or simplify it a little bit, because I said in the last video, hips traditionally on equal pitched roofs, so the main run of the roof is the same as the pitch of the hip end. Did I make that sense? Yeah, so both pitches are the same. The hip end of the main run, the hip will always be 45 degrees. So everything you do will run through that 45-degree angle, which catches up all the corners. In a bastard hip, that's not the case, and we tend to gravitate towards the corner of the plate, which is where the problems can start. So let's have a quick look at this job we've got here. What we've got here is a nice little lean-to roof. We've got a 21-degree pitch on here. Now this is for slate, and slate really sort of on its limits at sort of 20 degrees. So we've got 21-degree pitch there, and down the side, the gable, the hip end I should say, along the end here has got a 32-degree pitch, and that is to match the existing pitch of the house. So when you basically look at the end flank from up the garden, the end elevation I should say, obviously this hip end is the same pitch as the gable end. So first things first, we're going to look at how I go about basically setting out where this last, what I would call common rafter would come. Now, obviously this is just a lean-to, but if it was like a normal roof, I would do exactly the same thing, but I would probably just make my pair of rafters, sandwich a bit of ridge in, put my ceiling joist through, and then what I'd do is probably just lay it out on the floor and mark it out like that. So let's make a start. So one of the key factors you've got to consider when you're starting to set out a bastard hip like this is basically you've got to look at your soffit and fascia lines, because as I'm going to explain in the video, a bastard hip goes from 2 points. It goes from the point at the top where the two rafters, the common rafter and the crown or end rafter meet, and the corner of the roof. And the corner of the roof in this instance will be where the soffit and fascia is. So that is the exact corner of the roof. So you need to decide what your soffit and fascias want to be. Now generally on a normal hip, your soffit and fascias will be the same width and the same depth. So we're going to stick with that on this roof. And what I'm going to do in the first part is trying to set out. And again, I'm going to try, there's a few issues we've got here, and this is part of the reason why, unlike our American brothers, we don't set stuff out on the floor. We've got brickwork here, which, although it's new work, it's got a 300mm cavity, a 300mm, so 100mm cavity that end, but unfortunately it's drifted. We've got 120mm cavity this end. Also, unfortunately, the plate has not been put in quite the same level as the top of the brickwork. So we've got all these different sort of aspects. The fact is, I've had to, and I'm going to show you in a second, I've got to take my soffit and fascia line from further down the roof here, because the way that this extension roof has been orientated, this part of the roof had to go on after this part of the roof, and I had to set out for where that lead is to be rendered in before this roof was on. So I had to go with a constant here where I know the cavity is closer to being 100mm rather than trying to estimate the fact that it's 120mm that end. I hope that makes sense. So again, this isn't going to be millimetre perfect because we've got a few variations up there. Anyway, what I've basically done here, I'm going to show you these marks here. So we know that this is our soffit line, and these are all relative points. As long as the relative point on this rafter stays the same relative point on the other rafter, it's not a problem. So I've levelled a line across there, which is our soffit line. I hope you can see that. And then I've plumbed the line up here. This is 200mm. That's what I want my fascia to be. And I've plumbed a line up there, and I've taken about 18mm off, which is 18mm, which is the width of the fascia, and that gives us this point here. Now basically this is the top of our rafter at basically the rafter foot cut. The measurement from there, from memory, I'm not going to get my tape out because I've only got one hand, that's 95mm from this point to this point. So that's basically the height from the soffit to the top of the rafter. Now what I've got to do here, and there's various ways we can do that, and I'll show you how I've done it here. What we need to do on this end is we need to maintain that. So again, what I've done here Again, there's various ways you could do this. As I said, if this was a new roof, what I would do is I'd lay this all out on the floor and do it on the floor in exactly the same way. But what I've done here is I've just pulled this wall ledger all the way through, and I've tacked a little bit of timber on the bottom of it here. Let me in my shadow, look there. Then simply what I've done again, put my level line out through here. I don't know if you can see that, can you? I'm doing my best because I've got a bit of sun glare here. Level line out across there, 200 mil, plumbed up, and then I've marked back my 18 mil and then measured up the 95 mil. So this here now is the point of the top of the rafter where the plumb cut is at the end of the rafter foot. So now what we've got to basically do is we've got to plot a line at 32 degrees from this point up to the ridge there. Now, what I've done here, and again, there's another few issues we've got here, is the fact that this is rendered, and then there's this sort of brickwork detail here as well, this banding detail. So it doesn't matter because it's a bastard hip, but basically this, we're going to call it a ridge, is not actually the same in the same line as this wall line, so we've got to kind of ignore that. But it doesn't really matter, as I said, because it's a bastard hip. Normally you would half the run you'd set back for the for your last common, but again it doesn't matter here. It's more important about the pitch. So basically what we need to do is we need to plot a line from that point at 32 degrees up here. Can you see my finger there? Yeah, 32 degrees up here, and where that meets this point, that is basically where the face or the last common rafter will go. Now, what I've done here is quite simply, I've got a bit of rafter here, look. And what I did in this instance, because it was fairly easy, I'm just going to try and put that up there, look. So I've got that nail there, look, rest that on that nail. So what I did in this instance, which was quite easy, was I basically laid that piece of timber on there. I've got my digital angle finder, which I laid on the top, and as soon as it read 32 degrees, I basically put a mark. Again, I put this tiny little bit of timber in here just to simulate. This would be your ridge, you see. If this was a normal roof, this would just be your ridge coming through. And what I then did is basically where, you can just pull that up a little bit. Oh, there it is, look. Yeah, basically where this point hits this ridge, you then plumb down, and that is where your last common will go. So I hope that makes sense, and what I'm going to do now is just quickly reorientate this bit of rafter to show you how I would do it if I was laying it out on the ground. So you see what I've done here is I've got this piece of rafter, it's got a 32 degree pitch cut on the top, and what I've done is basically mocked it up and clamped it to the side of this rafter and this ceiling cord. Now again, I'm showing you this because if you were setting this out on a full roof, not just a mono pitch, a dual pitch, I'd do this down on the ground. We can double check exactly what this pitch is. All I would do is I'd get a right angle triangle calculator. We know what the pitch is, and we also know what the height is. So we input those two into right angle triangle calculator, and that will give us the run. So we know we can get that in exactly the same place. Then what you can do, you can clearly see here, look, and again, if you're looking at this video and you're wanting to get tips on bastard hips, I don't think I'm going to have to go into detail on how you would transfer. Basically, we know where our soffit and face is going to come, but we could literally orient that off the plate. We could level out, plumb down, measure, and we could also measure off the inside of the plate. Then what we could do is, it's fairly simple then, of just transferring those marks, transferring those measurements onto that rafter as well. So that would give us not a bird's mouth in this case, because unless we're going to put it on a pole plate, which we're not in this instance, there probably won't be a bird's mouth, because as you know, the steeper pitch won't sit in the same place on the plate as the lower pitch. In fact, it won't even hit the plate. So we'll come to that later in the video. So I hope you can see that's just the way that I would do it if I was laying this out on the floor. If it was a full roof, we can easily transfer our marks relative to our plate, the inside edge of our plate and the top of our plate. We could orient those onto there to get our soffit and fascia level right, and then we know that basically when we turn that raft around, it's going to fit in exactly the right position. So now hopefully I've made a reasonable job of explaining, I hope you can understand it, of how I basically go about setting out where the last common rafter is and the crown rafter. What I'm going to show you now is a bit of an illustration into where we can end up getting into trouble if we focus on the outside corner of the plates, which is historically where we start when we're doing normal hips. Now what I've done here to further help illustrate what I'm getting at, to hopefully help you visualise the points we're aiming to, I've just clamped on temporarily. This is a bit of 200mm wide soffit. This is going to represent our fascia, so it's 200mm from here to here, and then it's 200mm from there to there. So basically this is the corner of the roof, and what I've done, just roughly, I've tacked a nail in the top there. It's roughly the centre of the hip. And what I'm going to do to show you is I'm going to pull this line down and show you how the relationship between the corner of the building, the corner of the soffit and fascia, changes in relation to the corner of the actual building and the plate and the brickwork. So that line's roughly in the centre of where the hips are going to strike. Now if I bring it down to, you see, that is basically where the corner of the roof is. Now even then you can see I'm slightly, this hip's not going to run exactly to the corner. You can see where my thumb is, because actually we're running it to where the fascia, at the back of the fascia, you see. So you can see that even just moving it over that little bit does make a difference. But again, I'm going to have to sort of split a few hairs here and there, because as I said, we've got a much wider cavity this end and this facework's not level. But basically you can see here, look, you can see straight away that line represents the centre line of the hip, and you can see, look, nowhere near either the corner of the external brickwork skin or the outside edge of the plate there. So again, if we were to come down to the corner of the where the two plates are there, look, you can see we'd be in all kinds of trouble. Hang on, let's just pull my hand here, look. So you can see here, it's roughly lined up with the corner of the plate. So where my thumb is, it's 200mm from this side of the facework, but look, it's flush with that side of the facework, so that would never work. So that's why I think I said in my last video, if you don't get this hip in the right place, you can end up with either massively different soffits to try and make the fascia the right size, or massively different fascias to try and make the soffits the right size. So I hope that you can see now, look, that's the point we're going to. So that is the actual true line of the hip. So what I've actually done here, you can see, is I've actually clamped this string line in the right position. So that is actually the centre line of our hip. Now, as I said, there's a couple of things I could do here, and I did see actually my old mate Dan Cox, who's Square is going to get a bit of an outing today to cut these birds' mouths. I saw what he did was quite clever. Was basically he just put a piece of timber, lined it up the side of his line, and then, ooh, get that balance there, and then transfer that line down. So that's quite a good way of doing it. But like I said, the problem we've got, and if you do these kind of hips, well, if you do any kind of hips regularly and you've got to do it over brickwork, you'll understand what I'm saying, is that we're basically we're cutting the roof to one point. Sorry, we're cutting the roof to sit on one point, but it's actually, we're trying to make it work with another. And when those 2 points aren't consistent, that's when we have issues. So I'm not going to use this as the centre line of my hip, purely because, and I'm going to go into it shortly, we need to make sure that the height above plate for the hip end is the same as the height above plate, or relatively to the run of the roof. So I'm going to show you how we do that. But anyway, I hope you can see. But anyway, I hope you can see that gives a really good visualization of where the hip line runs, especially in relation to the corner of the building and the corner of the plate. Actually, I scratched that. I'm just going to change my mind. Actually, what I'm going to do, just out of interest, is I've put a couple of tiny marks there, not a big pencil mark, because it will be interesting just to see what sort of difference it is between where the roof actually wants to sit sort of geometrically over the plate and where it wants to be relative to the external brickwork skin. So I've just put a couple of tiny marks there, look. We'll just see, you know, how far out it is. Now I'm just going to explain about the importance of the height above plate measurement, but this is specifically on the hip end, or the end that has the steeper pitch, because by virtue of it being steeper, it will sit higher above the plate. So what we've done here, and this is how we're going to find the exact corner at the plate where the hip strikes through. So what I've done here, this is all fixed in now, it's exactly 32 degrees. This is your crown rafter, or your end common. Take no notice that it's not in line with the ridge for this demonstration. Obviously you can see I couldn't get it in line, but it's still a common rafter, it's just sat over a little bit. So what I've done here, plumbed the line up from the outside of the plate, measured up, and we've got 234mm. Now what I'm going to do is go over to this, and I'll say again that 234mm is to the top of the plate. So what I've done here, and again I've done this to sort of help with the visualization of it, I've tacked a piece of timber onto the underside of this rafter. As you can just see, it's slightly wet. I'll put a level mark across. You can see there, so that still represents the top of the plate. And then basically what I've done is plumbed up a line at 234 millimeters. So that, as you can see here, I'm trying to hold my tape, but that's 234 millimeters. So this point of the roof is exactly the same height as that point of the roof over there. And then what I've done is basically measured back from where these 2 points meet here to the outside edge of the plate, and that's 314 millimeters. Then what I've done here is then I've accommodated the fact that this is back slightly. I've measured 314 millimeters from the outside edge of that plate and put a line here. Now basically this is the height above plate, exactly the same height above plate on this run of the roof as it is on this run of the roof. Now what I've done here, we put those couple little marks on early on the side of that piece of wood, set my bevel to those, so this is going to give us the fairly accurate angle of the hip. And now what I've got to do is basically, because this point again, this corner point here is still not the center of the hip, again because of the way the hip isn't running at 45 degrees, the center line of the hip doesn't run with where these 2 points cross. So I'll cut a small piece of timber. In fact, what I'll do is cut a height above plate block, 234 millimeters, and I'll show you, we'll slide it against this, the angle of the hip that's on this sliding bevel here, and you'll see where the center of the hip, or the center of this height above plate block, won't run in the center of the external corner of where these 2 marks are. Right, I've cut my height above plate block, 234 millimeters, and I've kind of had to set up ready because I've only got one hand. So basically, I've set this bevel, as I said, to that those lines that we put on, which is fairly accurately the actual angle of the hip relative to the plate. And what I've done, look, I've slid this height block plate down until it's in line with it, but also more importantly, this left hand edge of the what is essentially going to be the hip hits that line, and the right hand edge hits the edge of the plate. Now we know that that hip is in exactly the right line, so if we try and just do it here, but if we, I don't know if I'm getting this, I'm sorry if I'm not, but you can see that the top of that height above plate block now lines in perfectly down the main run of the roof. I don't know if you can see that, and it'll be a bit more difficult to see here, but exactly the same here. Look, you'll see that they run into line perfectly. So you can see again, look, as I said, that the center of this hip isn't running in where these 2 points meet. So again, that's something where we're sort of thinking about traditional hips, where everything sort of runs through at 45 degrees to where the outside edge of the corner of the plates are. Obviously it's not relative here. And again, at the top, where these, I know it isn't, you've got to pretend, just pretend that is this is the common rafter. The center point of the hip isn't here, it'll be offset as well. So what we'll do now is I'll take this, we've done what we need, we've got the measurements we need. I'll unscrew this piece of rafter here. What we'll do is we'll get a piece of timber, lay it on top of this outside of this height above plate block, stick it up to sort of roughly more or less accurately where the common and the crown end rafter meet. And then what we can do is put a plumb line on that, and then that'll give us our hip plumb cut. Just a quick mention actually before we go ahead and find out what the plumb cut is for the hip. I've actually put a few additional marks down onto this plate here. So what I've actually done here, as you can see, is I've actually marked the center point of where the outside of plates, basically this would be the outside of the plate if it was a proper hip, but this is the represents the outside edge of the plate, and this is the outside edge of the plate, and I've put a mark here using this bevel, so it's still the hip angle. And then what I've done, so I've just put a tiny bit of mark there, and then what I've done is marked half of the thickness of the timber. When I put that back in there, if you can see, I hope you can see that. I haven't got a clue what I'm looking at because the sun's blaring in my viewfinder. So we can now see, look, what the difference offset is off center. So what's that, about 10 mil, maybe 12 mil? So now we know that when we go up here, that basically the actual striking line of the hip, the center line of the hip, is 12 mil further over to the left. So that's important. It's not important when we put this piece of timber down to get our hip plumb cut, but it will be important when we put those 2 top cuts on to make sure that the hip is far enough over one side so that when the jacks come in, they all sit nicely in the same plane. Just a small detail, and it wouldn't, potentially, I don't suppose it would matter if it wasn't. I mean, you're getting sort of almost splitting hairs here, but we're trying to aim to get it sort of as technically correct as possible. This isn't actually the hip material, but it's just a nice straight piece of timber. So we're going to lay that onto my height above plate block. Not bad. Make sure that's lined up. It's actually lining through quite nicely with that block, so we were not far off when we sort of put it up against the side of the string earlier. I'm just going to make sure, yeah, I mean it's roughly in the right position there. To the point it's not going to make much difference, so all I'm going to do now, just got to make sure that this is relatively upright, which it is, yep. It's got a slight cup on it, so I'm going to mark the plumb cut on this side. Put my plumb line on, just make sure it's not bad. We've got to make sure that it's upright, because it's laying over, obviously the plumb line that we're going to put on won't be accurate, so yeah, pretty happy with that. That's our plumb hip plumb cut. I might, while I'm at it, put the seat cut on as well. That's good. Right, we can get our square set up now. Right, that's the square set to the hip plumb cut. You know, matches nicely. We've got the seat cut on there just to double check it. So now all we've got to do really is take some measurements for our hip. Now, I've got a really wide hip over there. It's a 9-inch hip, but it still may not be. This is the thing, because obviously the height above plate is much bigger on the hip end, it'll be the same for the hip. So it may well be that the height above plate for the hip 234, it may not actually, the hip may not actually have a bird's mouth in it. So I'm going to check a few bits and bobs. But what I'm going to do in the first instance on a normal hip, I would simply now measure from this point on the plate up to the point either side. I'd lay a 45mm piece of timber in where the common and the end crown rafter meet, and there'd be my measuring points. Because I'm not 100% sure we're going to have a bird's mouth here, I'm not going to do that in this instance. What I'm going to do is going to measure to the top of the hip, so that's basically the top of the plumb cut. So that'll give me an idea of whether there'll be a bird's mouth or not. So I'm going to take those measurements now. I just need to make sure, little thing, just need to make sure that that's upright, which look, that is, so the plate has been bedded down level, so wonders never cease. So yeah, I can now make sure that I get the right measuring points up there, because they're offset as I said, and then we can put the plumb cut on the top of the hip over there, make that double cut, and then we'll see if we've got to have a bird's mouth in the hip. I got a little bit ahead of myself, getting a little bit excited. We can't put any cuts on that hip. I mean, obviously we know what the hip plumb cut is, but we don't know what the side cuts are or the bevel cut, because obviously we're not, the hip isn't at 45 degrees. So as soon as you move off 45 degrees, those bevel cuts will no longer be 45 degrees. So what I'm going to do is, as I said, this height above plate block actually does line in quite nicely. I know we put it into that string, but it all actually ties up quite nicely. When I laid this piece of 5x2 on top to get the hip plumb cut, it all lined in nice, so I'm happy that that is the actual angle. So all I'm going to do, put this roofing square look up against the side of it, butt it to the pivot point. What we've got there, 50, 60, 61 degrees. I've written that down. We've got 61 degrees there, and obviously it should be 29 because it adds up to 90. And then we put it here, look, yeah. So we've got 29 degrees there. So on the lower pitch, the bevel cut is 29 degrees. On the steeper pitch, the bevel cut is 61 degrees. I'm probably going to have to draw that out old school, because I think my saw only goes over to 57 degrees. But at least we now know what those bevel cuts are, so we can put this offset centre measurement onto the top of the hip, make those cuts. If it doesn't need a bird's mouth, we can try that in. What I've done is I've just cut a little test piece here, just with the bevels and the angles that I showed you earlier, because I don't think it matters, but obviously I've only got one piece of one length of 9x2, and I don't want to get it wrong. So as you can see, what I've done here, as I spoke earlier about, you can see how the centre of this timber is not actually where the corner of the plates sort of turn, and it will be the same for where that internal corner is, where basically, as I know I've said it many times before, the common rafter and the end crown rafter. So you can see what I've done is pretty much transferred that mark. You can see there, I said it was about, look, if I put that there, that's better, look. You can see, I'm trying to hold it, it's not going to hold. Anyway, look, you can see, look, this line here lines up with that line there, look. So you can see that those two bits of timber sort of still line in. So you can see that when we come up here, when that goes into where these two rafters meet, you see, so you can see by offsetting it, look, see where my finger is? That side of the hip is nice and flush with that rafter, and this side of the hip is nice and flush with this rafter. Now, if we put it in the centre, like I said, this side of the hip would be low on that rafter, and this side of the hip would be high on this rafter. And again, I'm just sort of spying it in, but I know it's sort of roughly in the right line there. So I'm pretty happy that those cuts are going to work. Right, hopefully you can see that I'm going to cut this, mark it, but really important that we get the orientation right on this bit of hip. I'm going to cut about 1 metre off the end. It's got a split in it, but also we don't need it to be longer than it needs to be. So I know I cut this little bit of mock up earlier, but this is going to be really help me to make sure that I don't get the cuts on the wrong side. Probably won't be the end of the world if I did get them on the wrong side, because at this point, as long as I twig it and don't cut a bird's mouth on the bottom, I could recut them. But that's a big cut by hand. I only want to do that once. So yeah, so I've got my point here. I'm going to start off by putting my plumb cut on it. So again, we know that the way that the hip is oriented based on this piece is that the 29-degree cut is on this side. So I think what I'll do is go ahead and make that cut first, reduce the bulk of this hip. It may jiggle the camera around a little bit when it drops off, but hold on tight, everybody. Here we go. There we go. Wow, that's heavy. So now what I'm going to do, as I explained, I'll just lift that up. As I explained, what I'm now going to do, basically put this sort of 10 or 12 mil mark down on the top here. Just might as well mark that sort of directly. We know that it's roughly fitting, don't we? So sort of, it's pretty accurate. I'm happy. I know I'm sort of guessing here and there, but you know, we're talking millimeters here. Right, and then we've got, this is the bevel cut or the top cut, which set on, I've set on my bevel, so we'll just put that in. That goes along there. And then what we can do then now is just finish off with the plumb cut down the other side. So what I've got to do now is basically cut that out. I can, again, this is a nice straight bit of timber, this actually, so I'll just transfer that mark down there. I think for ease of cutting, I think I'm probably going to cut it, because I'm kind of going against the grain there, with the hip is the bit I want left, so I'm going to turn it over so I'm going with the grain. Anyone who spent a lot of time hand cutting jack rafters, maybe when they were younger, before you know, power tools are really prevalent, will know that even a little thing like cutting with the grain going in the right direction can make a big difference, because these cuts are quite mighty. So there we go. So what I'll do now, get the handsaw out, cut that. Let's see how we get on. It's a big long cut. Let's see if the saw stays straight. Now I've got that cut nicely all the way down, I'm happy with it. What I can do is, as I'm sawing, I can keep this as a guide and basically bring the saw down and bring the cut through. Again, there's no shame if I've got to get the plane on this just to clean it up. No shame in that, it's a big cut. Yeah, we're definitely starting to go out a little bit there. Yeah, we're definitely starting to slip a little bit there. That's a big cut. And if you can just see, we're starting to slip off the line a bit here. So I think what I'll do is come back in from the top. minimise how far out it'll get. Just a little bit to plane up. Perhaps a nice sharp saw would have helped. I'm not making excuses. I was cutting insulation with this yesterday. There we go. Right, let's have a little look at that. It's made me work. It's like being back in the 80s. So there, I'm not too bothered with that. I'll just get my block plane, just tie that up a little bit, and we'll see how that fits. So I've just hit this cut with this block plane, and I've now found out that not only my saw blunt, but my block plane is as well. But you can see we sort of, can you see that? Straightened up quite nicely. So yeah, as I said, repeating myself, nothing wrong with you have to just tickle a little cut with a block plane to make it sit nice. You know, that's how we used to do it. There actually is one last little thing I nearly forgot. I do need the measurement to that top cut, the top plumb cut of the hip, because I need to take off the bottom of the hip so that it goes over the brickwork. So we do actually need to know roughly where that is. So again, it doesn't have to be sort of millimetre perfect. So we've got 2,780 there. Taking the measurement from where the right hand side of the hip strikes the end common or crown rafter down to this height above plate block, and then obviously that's the height above plate plumb line. I've done the same as you watched, taking the measurement from the top of the hip. Here it is, that's that will be the top of our height above plate block, measured down the 200 whatever it was, 234 millimetres. Put a level line across, that's the line of our plate, and then we measure 100 mil down, because as you can see here, the brickwork is, well, we've got that 115 mil lower, so we want a bit of space to get our soffit in. So basically, if I cut that off now, that hip should go in. So the hip's nearly ready to go in. As I said earlier, all I've got to do now is check the measurement of the hip down to the height above plate block and see if we've got to have a little bit of a bird's mouth in the bottom of this hip. So I'll just do that now. Kind of doing this on my own. Normally I'd perhaps have someone helping me to make it more accurate, but we're going to hook the tape, hope we can get it sort of close enough. There. So that is 2,785. Let's put that onto this hip now. I flipped the hip over and squared that mark I've just put across, put a plumb line down on it. As we can see, here's a height above plate block. As we put that height above plate block on, you can see that although it doesn't touch, there's not a bird's mouth where on the inside corner here, obviously because the plate is wider, it is going to catch. So basically what we need to do is cut, it's only a tiny bit, look, so I think it's, from memory, it's 80 millimeters from this line here to this line here, and I'll show you how I got that. If you imagine that height above plate block was at the corner here, well, it was over here, but we squared that across, and then that's 80 mil from there to there. So we just continue that out, 80 mil. You see, if I put that there, look, just to try and help you, that block there, look, as you see, is here. So that's all we're doing, look, is we brought that 80 mil further down. When we put that back over here, look, that goes on there. Okay, so we bring it so that the top of the plate block is with the top of the rafter. See, that's our line there, 80 mil back from there, and this is the tiny bit we've got to cut out. Now, that's going to have a bit of a splayed bird's mouth in it. To be honest, it's so small that you could do, if you wanted to and give your brain a rest, you could actually just cut this down here a little bit. And I'm not saying I might not even do that, but it's such a small amount, you know, there's nothing wrong with taking a tiny bit out of there as opposed to cutting a bird's mouth in. I'm not sure what I'll do yet, but we'll find out in a minute. There it is, there's that tiny little splayed bird's mouth, that's all that's to come out. And what I'm going to do in this instance, just because it gives me more flexibility, haven't tested those top cuts yet, so if I put this on here, I'm pretty much, not stuffed, but you know, there's more things I've got to do if I need to redo those cuts because they're not quite accurate, or I've got this measurement slightly wrong. It's such a small amount that what I'm going to do is literally just nip it out of this corner here, and then that allow that hip to slide up and down if I need to. You might call it cheating, it's not really, it's hardly a massive bearing there, is it? So yeah, let's do that and let's try it in. Right, let's go. Let's try it in. Here we go. The time has come. Here we go. Let's see what it's going to be like. Ultimately, like I said, if it's not quite right, I've got a bit of wiggle room to redo those cuts, but let's be brave. Well, I tell you what, that isn't bad. Maybe just a plum cut. Let's just put a tack in it. I'll show what we're doing. Might be splitting hairs actually. Yes, right, that's the top. That's looking good. Let's have a look at the bottom here. I think we need to go down a bit more. What I said it was? 2, 3, 4. Yeah, so I've got to come down, so that's probably why to make that plum cut better, isn't it? So let's have a quick look. I'll quickly show you first fitting. Pretty good. So if I show you at the top here first, pretty happy with how they've all gone. Look, maybe a tiny bit open there, potentially just playing a little bit off the top of that. Plum cut, it's not too bad, probably been, but you can see how these, by offsetting it, you see if we'd have run to the corner like I said, these shoulders wouldn't lined up, so that's nicely in line with that shoulder, with that rafter. This is nicely in line with this rafter. So let's just have a little look down here. I think it's just a tiny bit high, as you can see here. Again, and this was based off a sort of rough-ish measurement to here. You can see that these two lines here, I mean, you see that these two lines here really should line up. So yeah, this line here, you see, forget this one, this line here should be lining up with here. So this just needs to drop in a little bit more. So I'll just take a little bit more of that plate, drop that in and have another look at it. I'm super happy with that. I just tickled a little bit more out the bottom of this plate. I'm glad I did, because it's not far off. You can just see it's not far off the line I put on for the bird's mouth, but it's such a small amount to chisel out. It's not going to affect the strength of the plate, and it just gives me more flexibility. So as you can see here now, look, that this height above plate line is now this height above plate this is the plum cut on the hip, is now in line with the line that we put back, which obviously is in line with that 234mm line there. I'm really happy with it actually. I think what I'm going to do, and I know you're probably going to think I'm mad, is I'm just going to tease a little bit more out of here just to shut this up. I mean, that's perfectly good enough, but while we're filming it, why not? So yeah, that has gone really well. Obviously this is the line we're looking at here, forget this one. This line comes down, look, and it's right on the corner where our height above plate is as well. So that should be 234mm, I think we said, look, something like that. Is that about right? Something like that, yeah. So now you can see, just before I alternate, you can see that when we bring this a camera down, if you can see that, oh, I hope you can see, that's beautifully in the plane of that roof. And then when we bring the camera this way, we can't see that, can we? No, because it's, I haven't done that yet, but when we get those rafters in there, that'll plane in nicely as well. We know that because the height above plate here is the same as the height above plate over there. Really, really happy with that. It's lunchtime. I'm going to have something to eat. I've just put this mock-up piece of soffit back on just to show you, you know, that looks like terrible, like it's nowhere near, but as you see, as this hip runs out, I mean, the corner point, you can just see up there, look, you see that? The corner point is pretty much exactly, the corner of the hip is pretty much exactly where the corner of our soffit and fascia is going to be. I know it'll be slightly offset for the reasons I explained above there, but certainly, you know, it's going to be well within the tolerance of where we want it in terms of the upstand of the fascia. So yeah, really happy that that hip is now in, and now it really is simple. We'll infill this side, bird's mouse on the bottom of the rafters. We'll infill this side, all the jack rafters will be hand cut at the top. What I shall do here, I won't be putting a pole plate in or anything. Again, you could just raise this plate up and cut bird's mouth into these rafters, but then you run into potentially you've got to do further things to make sure your ceiling runs through. So what I'll do in this instance is I'll pin this hip so it's straight, get these jacks in here. I know you should do them in pairs so the hip doesn't bow, but I'll pin this, brace this hip so it's straight, put these rafters in, put those last ceiling cords in, and then literally all we'll do is we'll nail the side of these rafters up onto the ceiling cords as they come through. It'll be absolutely fine. I might cut a little wedge in behind them, but yeah, pretty much cracked it now. It's all pretty straightforward infill work. Put this last one in position. Just another Dan Cox trick, just put a little nail over the end just to hold it while it sits on the hip. Just teased out a little bit of this insulation, and now we'll just get that nailed up. Happy with that? Same with this one. Just make sure that hip's nice and straight now. Nail them on the top there. Then I can put these last few joists in, put the stub joists across onto this plate, and then we can easily just cut some plumb cuts, the top jack cuts on those other rafters, set a line up, pull them up to a line and nail them. Absolutely beautiful. So that side of jack rafters is in. I'm just coming to finish this side. Pretty easy, as I said. All I've got to do is put the jack cut on the top there. We don't need to worry about a bird's mouth. I've stripped out all this bit here, which is obviously where our mark was, where we needed the I did put a pencil mark. You can see actually I put a pencil mark on the wall as well, but not a problem, because all we need to do is we've got a height above plate block here, so all we need to do is make sure that the top of the rafter is in line with the top of that height above plate line, and it will be in the right place. This one again, it doesn't still, because of the way this is all sort of offset and packed out, this still doesn't fit tight against there, so I'll put probably a little bit of batten or packers in there, fix this onto that one, and then all the other ones will just fix straight up the side of these little stub joists. So yeah, that's nearly it now. What, three more rafters to put in, and then we've got a sub fascia to put round and the face to put round. But yeah, in effect we're nearly done. So like I said, just got to run these last few rafters in here. Pretty simple, jack cut on the top with the saw set over. That's easy enough. Set a string line up. Got that end one in, and now literally all I'll do, as I said, put these little stub joists across, lift it up, clamp it until it hits the line and fix it. What I probably will do is just cut some little sort of packers up under here just to directly come down underneath the rafter onto the plate. But yeah, you know, really happy with that. Got it on a run now. I actually run out of timber, so I'm either going to have to sort of kind of cut what I need out of stuff I've got laying around, or go and get another bit of 6x2. I've got 5x2 there. I've got 6x2 there. But this should be 7x2, so I don't know whether to put it in there. I think it'll still be plenty strong enough, because it's only, what, 1.5 metres, but I've done such a nice job of it all. I know it's not going to be seen again, but I think I'd rather that with 7x2 in there, so that matches in. So, but yeah, really happy now. And I haven't filmed too much of me just doing this info, because I've got a nasty feeling this video is going to be quite long anyway, and mostly me yapping. But you know, if it's the sort of thing that you're interested in, the bastard hips, you know, maybe you've watched right to this point. Not much longer now, so I'll just get this wrapped up, cut the rafter feet off, put my sub fascia around, and then we'll do a quick recap, and then that'll be that. Right, that's done. I didn't show you all me filling in these little bits and bobs, because to be honest, it's fairly sort of mundane, and I think the video is going to be long enough as it is. So as you can see, like we said, I'll just get my tape out here. You can see that we've got, I know that's 180 because we've got the fascia to go on there yet. We've got 180 there, and we've got 180 there. And can you see this, the corner? I've managed to sort of tickle it so it worked out quite well actually. Like we said, the sort of centre line of the hip isn't actually the centre line of this hip timber, if that makes sense. So when that comes down here, you see it runs through there. You can see it's slightly off centre. So yeah, I'm pretty happy that I managed to sort of make it work, even though the brickwork was out a little bit. So yeah, really happy. All my joints are nice. You know, these obviously, these ones came straight off the saw. These ones cut by hand. You know, really happy with those. You know, they came straight off the saw. So yeah, it's all done. I'm really happy with it. Say it's a couple of bits and bobs I'll do. Probably cut some wedges up under here. I'll probably just put that little bit that'll go sort of in there somehow, give that a little bit of additional support. Got to do a few tiny bits of frame in here just to catch up the plasterboard. But yeah, as you can see here, look, if I go sort of have a little look over it, these rafters are just sort of nailed into the side of these sort of stub joists. But when I put those packers underneath, that'll make those nice and solid. As I said, as we come up here, look, we got some, you know, nice lines. That's all hand cut. We've got some nice lines where it all joins together. Just got that nail in there. Help me hold that up. So yeah, it's really important. There's lots of sort of information in this video, and I hope it's sort of helped, even if it's helped one person sort of demystify the bastard hip a little bit. But you can see, obviously, look, this hip doesn't run in the centre line because that's not the centre line of the roof. The centre line of the roof is sort of further over behind this point where these back of these two rafters is. And as you can see, we have to offset it so that these rafters run in nicely. That runs in really nicely. That edge, you see, this one's really nicely in that edge. And sort of as we come down, the same all the way down, looks really nice. So we've got a lovely plane down through here. Hopefully you can see now, look, that's really nice all the way down through there. And then obviously we've got a lovely plane down through here as well. Hopefully you can see that, look, so that all fits in really nicely. Really happy with that. Looks an absolute treat. Yeah, I don't really know what else to say. You know, I'm really pleased with it. It's always nice to do a good job of something that's not particularly sort of straightforward. And these bastard hips, you know, if you don't, I mean, I don't do many. You know, I've only done 2 or 3 in my whole career, but I just think about things logically, and it sort of will unfold in front of you. So that's it for this video. I don't know how long it's going to be. I daren't think. I feel like I've spent a lot of time talking into the camera. This has probably taken me twice as long to do because I've been trying to film it and set sort of things up to show you and try and explain. I hope I've done a reasonable job. I say it might be a bit of a specialist video. It might be quite long, and it might just be for sort of seasoned carpenters who, again, we don't do these bastard tips often. So sometimes just a little bit of a few little tips, maybe, you know, even just showing you, I can't bend down that far, I'm not flexible enough. Even just sort of getting in your head where the roof sort of starts from. You know, we've got to forget, as I've said many times, forget what you know about traditional hips in terms of the corner of the plate, because as you can see here, it looks sort of horrific, but by the time the hip comes down, it is in the corner, the exact corner of the roof. So there we go. Believe it or not, I'm not actually finished here yet. It's nearly 5 o'clock. I've still got to put the soffit and fascia on and sort of fill in all the rest of this insulation because the guy's coming to roof it tomorrow. So as I always say at the end of my videos, I hope you found it interesting. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you have, thanks for watching. There was just one last thing. I just put the string line down, not the centre of the hip, but basically the centre point of where the 2 roofs would meet. It's quite late. I've got all the soffit and fascia on now. I don't know what time it is. Look. 5 to 8, and I just wanted to show you what I was saying about I've done quite well. I'm quite pleased how this has all gone. You can see, look, the centre part of the hip is still not where the 2 roofs meet, and if we put this to this corner, look, this was the corner that we were working towards, look, you can see we're not far off, look. So I said that this string line, the centre where the 2 roofs meet, was about 10 mil off the edge. So as you can see there, look, we're not far off. And what I'll say is that if that was, I know you might struggle to sort of kind of get your head around this, but if you were to cut the dihedral angles on the top of this hip to suit each pitch, that's where they would meet. They would meet roughly 10 mm from one edge. So as you can see there, look, really not too bad considering the sort of variables there was on this roof. So roof is coming tomorrow, that's why I've had to work late. So yeah, really happy with this.